Well, for more, we are now joined by the Minister of Housing for British Columbia, Ravi Kahlon. Minister, good to see you again. Thank you for joining the program.
Yeah, nice to see you. Thanks so much for having me.
Listen, I want to begin with your reaction to the federal government's launch of the Canada Builds program, because it is styled after your own BC Builds program. When you spoke with your federal counterparts, what was it that made your province's program one that Ottawa would want to emulate?
Well, we're pleased to see the federal government go in that direction. We have heard for a long time from our citizens, from our development community, our not-for-profit community, that in order to address the housing crisis, governments must play a more active role in that. And we have been supporting the private sector to continue to increase housing. But there was something missing in the entire plan. And so when we launched it, it was about unlocking government-owned lands, provincially, federally, local government lands with government financing, tapping the private sector to help build it, and having the not-for-profit continue to operate it. And we just felt, learning from Singapore, Vienna, in Austria, in parts of India, that there are many examples around the world where governments play an active role in housing that helps address housing that is desperately needed. And that's why we went in that direction. And having the federal government come in not only is good for BC, I think it's good for most parts of the province that will see this type of housing being built.
Mm-hmm. Now, you launched your own program back in February. It follows your Homes for People plan that was announced the year before. I'm wondering, when you count up the number of units, how many homes do you think have been fast-tracked already because of BC Builds?
Well, BC Builds just launched. We had our first few sites that we've announced, one in North Vancouver targeting healthcare workers, housing for healthcare workers, and folks working as on the ports. And we have one other project on the island, which is a partnership with First Nations. It'll be the first project on reserve for this type of housing. So we've only launched a couple of projects, but we have a big lineup of communities coming forward. And so I suspect we're going to have 18 to 20 projects by the end of the year. That is huge for us in the province. And again, this is the type of housing that targets the nurses, the firefighters, the police officers, the workforce that we need to keep our communities continue to move forward. And we're going to continue to build housing at shelter rates, supportive housing, low-income housing, because we know that's needed as well.
Mm-hmm. Now, according to the Canada Housing and Mortgage Corporation, they say in Vancouver it takes about 26 months or over 2 years for an apartment to kind of go from plan to construction, completed construction. How does BC Builds and Canada Builds, how does that affect the timeline? Does it speed it up?
Yeah, we are already seeing expedited timelines. One of the requirements we have for local governments, if they want to see this type of housing, is that the project be moved to the front of the queue. We have also made significant changes already in the province. We changed the law last fall, that if any project comes within what the community already has in their community plan, that there's no public hearings. So many of our projects won't have to go through public hearings, which saves at least a year, if not more. We have also made changes to other bylaws and local government rules to make sure that all projects go faster. Not only BC Builds projects, but all projects, whether they're government or non-government.
Now, I mentioned CMHC, and back in September, and I know you know this, they said that for affordability to be restored in British Columbia, the province would need to add about 610,000 additional units. Are you making a big chunk in that? Are there plans to tackle that number?
Yeah, I mean, if anyone thinks that government alone can build that much housing, they're delusional. This is going to require both the private sector to step up, the non-market space to be fully participating, but also governments to be stepping in. And so that's why we're allowing 3 or 4 units, 4plexes on single-family lots across the province. We're allowing for 6 units to be built anywhere where there's frequent transit, bus service that comes very frequently. And we're also allowing, with transit-oriented development, any investment we make in transit, it has an understanding that housing needs to come with it. So we've made some major changes We believe just within the next 5 years, we can get over 200,000 net new housing units being built in the province, net new on top of what we're already doing. And we're fortunate in British Columbia because of changes we've made. We have the highest per capita housing starts in the country right now. And so we believe we're on the right path. Whether we reach the goal or not, it's hard to say because there's a lot of market conditions that we can't control. But we certainly are taking advice from the BC Housing Task Force, which gave us a lot of recommendations. But we also look very closely at the Ontario Task Force report, and we're taking the best ideas from both and implementing them in BC.
Mm-hmm. I'm wondering what you think the role needs to be for government going forward, though, because, you know, as I don't have to tell you, British Columbia has long had an affordability issue when it comes to housing. We've seen a flurry of housing initiatives in this past year, both from Ottawa and from your own government in Victoria. How much longer do governments need to be providing builders access to low-cost loans, fast-tracking building permits, essentially to make this kind of change permanent? Is this a short-term venture, or is this a permanent role now for government?
Well, I would say a couple things. One, if anyone thinks that you're able to solve the housing crisis without governments being involved, they're not serious about addressing the housing challenge. Governments for 2 decades have walked away. And if you look at the shortage of affordable housing that we have in BC or across the country, you can pretty much do the math on what would have been built by federal governments and provincial governments if they had continuously been building. And so we in British Columbia believe that the government certainly has a role to invest directly. We are also unlocking the private sector to step up and do what the private sector does, but both need to happen at the same time. Now, to the question about low-cost financing for private sector development, I think in this high-interest environment, when we're dealing with high levels of global inflation, challenges because of labor shortages, we are going to need to be in this space. I don't think this will be a space that governments need to be in permanently going forward, but certainly for the next 3-4 years, I think it's going to be important for us to support the private sector. Even they are having a difficult time with the conditions right now to make projects viable. And so we need to support them to continue to do what they're doing. But we need governments to invest in housing. We need to invest in Indigenous housing on and off reserve. BC is the only province in the country that is doing that, and we want the federal government to play a bigger role.
Minister Oz, appreciate the time. Thank you for this today.
Thanks for having me, and I look forward to being back again soon.